We are going to talk about rebirthing Christmas, and I wanted to read one of my favorite quotes from my favorite Christmas movie. How many of you guys have a favorite Christmas movie, by the way?
Yeah.
Just name a couple of them.
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Elf, that's so good. What else? Christmas Vacation. Yeah, that's so good. Anyone else?
Jim Carrey's Grinch.
Grinch. I like Jim Carrey's Grinch. Yes. I can't imagine the new one is as good. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, good movies. Here's one of my favorite movies during this holiday season. It's the British do Christmas only the way the British can do it, wonderfully, with Colin Firth and Keira Knightley. One of my favorite movies is Love Actually, and it starts with this, and it's Hugh Grant, because I love his goofy nature and his accent. Hugh Grant says this in the beginning: "Whenever I get gloomy with the state of the world, I think about the arrivals gate at Heathrow Airport. General opinions starting to make out that we live in a world of hatred and greed. But I don't see it that way. It seems to me that love is everywhere. Often it's not particularly dignified or newsworthy, but it's always there. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, old friends. When the planes hit the Twin Towers, as far as I know, none of the phone calls from the people on board were messages of hate or revenge. They were all messages of love. And if you look for it, I've got a sneaky feeling you'll find that love actually is all around." Beautiful. And so, for this holiday season, we're going to look at Christmas. We're going to look at it from a couple different perspectives. And I'm really excited to share some ideas about what it means Christmas meant for them during that time era and different time eras all throughout history, what it could mean for us today. Because I think sometimes we get very caught up in what we know of Christmas today as. We get caught up in a lot of commercialism. I like to laugh when people will say, "Man, we just need to we need to put the Christ back in Christmas." And I have to laugh a little bit because I'm thinking, wasn't Jesus Jewish? He would have been celebrating Hanukkah, right? And so there's a lot of interesting things. We'll get riled up over red cups at Starbucks, those kind of things. And so I want to look at Christmas from a little different perspective, and I'm going to invite you to share ideas and discuss as well. This should be a lot of fun. So here we go. Christmas and the nativity scene, the Jesus birth story, they actually share a lot of things in common. And I wanted to share with you because both of these stories, and again, the Christmas story and a lot of the traditions and rituals will oftentimes say, well, that has nothing to do with the birth of Jesus, right? But it's interesting, both of them do something very similar. The writers, the authors, the people putting everything together, they're doing something very similar. What they're doing is they're pulling from a lot of story and a lot of tradition, and they're building something really beautiful. So I thought I'd start with this today with Christmas. We have a lot of interesting ritual with Christmas that I think sometimes we don't really know where it came from. So I wanted to share with you guys a couple different things about Christmas that I find really interesting. So here we go. How many of you have ever heard of the Yule log? We actually sang a little bit about that. The Yule log. The Yule log, now it's become like a chocolate dessert, right? But for the Scandinavians, long before Christmas was ever celebrated, they would actually bring in a special piece of wood, and they would bring it into the hearth. And during the feast, the festival of Yule, during December, what they would do is they were cold. December, Scandinavians, right? And they were looking forward to spring. And so if the gods control the seasons, you are praying for spring to come, am I right? Here in California, we don't get that. We're like, I don't know, it's kind of always here. But for them, it was very important that they had spring show up, because then they could begin in their agricultural movements, actually grow things again, have food to eat. They're living off of what they made in summer and in fall. And so they would pray, and they would burn the wood, and they would tell the stories of Thor. And the stories of Thor were this: Thor would fight the ice gods. And so every year, Thor would be up there, and he would be fighting the ice gods, and he would win every single time. Yeah. This is a different Thor than the Avengers Thor even. This is like even more God-like Thor. Thor, and this is something they would do to celebrate Thor, who would be winning against the ice gods and bring in spring. Gift giving. How many of you enjoy getting gifts? It's kind of nice. If you look at the history of gift giving, you can find this history goes way, way, way back before the celebration of Jesus and the birth. You'll find that this often was associated with not just the season of solstice. You had this often all over in every culture, some kind of celebration with gifts. For the Romans, they had a celebration where they would celebrate Saturn. And here's what they would do. They would give gifts to one another during that week. They would give gifts of imitation fruit. For us, we'd think, oh, plastic apple, thanks. Like, what do I do with this? For them, that was an image, that was a picture, it was a symbol of basically fertility. And so it was a reminder that you will be fertile. The gods will bless you. Another thing that they would give is dolls. And some of you, when you were growing up, you got dolls for Christmas, right? You got Barbie, those kind of things. For them, though, a doll didn't quite represent that. The doll was a symbol of sacrifice. So when you got Barbie in their culture, it would have been like a reminder that, yes, the sacrifices will continue very soon. Weird? For our culture, absolutely. Candles reminiscent of basically associated with the different celebrations that they were going to have. Here's another thing that would happen during that time. They would put a mock king in charge for the week. And watch this now. Anyone that's ever read about the crucifixion, this will make sense to you. They choose a slave or a criminal, and they put the criminal or the slave in charge for that week. And so this was a celebration that they would do, and there would be chaos. And it became actually such a debaucherous week that it became the highest week of crimes and rape and everything else. It got really, really bad. And actually, if you've ever heard of the movie The Purge, that's what this would have looked like. It would have looked like The Purge. And so you can imagine when Rome becomes Christian, they actually take this festival and they begin adding and subtracting certain things. This is where many of us get the ideas of gifts that have kind of changed over time. None of us are giving sacrificial babies dolls anymore, right? Okay, well, I mean, there's that. Good. Sun worship. I thought this was just an interesting tradition. It really revolved around the winter solstice. In Guatemala, they would do this. They would have men climb up those poles. These were 50 feet high. And these men would strap they'd tie a little bit of rope into a circle, and they'd hang from it, and they'd spin. And here's the thing. Today we have something called Groundhog's Day. What happens when the groundhog pops up and you see it, and it sees its shadow?
It sees its shadow longer winter.
Longer winter. If it doesn't see its shadow, spring's coming. For them, it was, if the dude falls and lands on his feet, spring is coming quick. If he falls and he dies, winter's a little bit longer. Interesting, right? These are some of the interesting traditions you would find with winter solstice. The Christmas tree. How many of you are going to have a Christmas tree this year? We're trying to figure out, do we want a fake one or a real one? We just keep going back and forth. I still feel like the real one's just kind of a joy to have. But many ancient cultures, Northern Hemisphere, again, during the time of winter solstice, they would bring in greenery. And the greenery was a reminder that there's going to be life again. And there's even Scandinavian, Germanic tribes that they would go and they would actually find the largest tree in the middle of their village. They would actually decorate it with different fruits and things, again, as a reminder, spring is coming. We're going to get through the pain, the death of winter, and we're going to move into new life. Those are all different traditions that were there, right? And today, I think we have these traditions and we enjoy them, but most of the time we don't really know where they came from. And so it's kind of fun to look back and realize Christmas with Santa and elves and reindeers and everything else is really a conglomeration of a bunch of rituals and stories that have all been told over time and kind of mixed together. Today, Christmas for many of us in America is a bit of a consumer kind of week, right? Again, very sad. We talked about this last week, that Thanksgiving, we're all grateful, and then the very day after, we're slamming 65-inch TV screens into our tiny Prius, and we're screaming at people and running people over, all to prepare for Christmas. But there is interesting ritual and ideas associated that have all come together to make Christmas Christmas. And of course, there is the Jewish two stories of Jesus and the birth. And so that's also been added to Christmas. And so I want to share some ideas about the birth and how the birth, you're actually going to see a lot of different stories and characters and rituals show up from the past in the birth narrative. Are you guys ready for this? This is a lot of fun. Here we go. The birth narrative. The camels, the Wisemen, the shepherds, the star, the stable, which would have actually been more of a cave during that time period. But caves don't look quite as cool in the nativity scene, do they? But we have all of these different things that we've all become very familiar with. But here's what I want you to remember. The Gospels are written by Christians? Fundamentalists in the 19th century? 20th century? No, they were written by Jewish people. And so there's two different writers. There's 4 Gospels, but only 2 of them found it important enough to talk about the birth. The other 2 leave it out. Mark was the first Gospel writer, but then Matthew came along about 15 to 20 years later. Matthew, he would have been about maybe 10 years after the destruction of the temple. And again, if you're a Jewish person, the temple was where life was. It would be like us if the loft burned down and in it Keith and Tony got burned up and Joe and all the other leadership. You know what we'd say? What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Well, Kim's got a nice living room. You know, what are we going to do? I don't know. That's what they're asking. And they're actually looking for a deep sense of hope and life again. They're asking what's next. And so what you and I would do is we'd start telling the stories that brought us life, that brought us hope again. And that's what Matthew and Luke are doing. And truth be told, Matthew tells it first. Luke is going to he's going to come around another 15, 20 years later. He's going to borrow some from Matthew. He's also going to add his own twist to it. The two, if you read it side by side, they don't agree. They don't. So if you're thinking this is literal history, that it's all historically accurately perfect, that's not how the writers wrote. So if you have a big hang up of like the historicity of the stories, you may be missing the beauty of the story. So I'm going to share with you some interesting points. But let me start with this. Just yell it out. What method of travel did the wise men use? Camels. Perfect. How many wise men were there? 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Good. Here's what I've done this before with some of you. It's interesting because there's actually no mention of any camels in Matthew or Luke. Where did the camels come from, you think? The wise men, there's actually no number. We just know that there were 3 different gifts mentioned, but we don't actually know how many wise men. There could have been a wise man bearing like bundt cake or fruit cake. Maybe they didn't like the fruitcake, so they kind of left him out. I have no idea. They only mentioned 3. Interesting, right? Again, it's not about historicity. It's not about it being perfectly told. What the beauty is here is there's something deeper going on, and some of these traditions, I'll show you where they actually come from. Are you ready for it? Cool. First off, Matthew, when he's looking back, and he's talking to a people who are looking back, and their temple's been destroyed, and they're finding that there's no hope. They're in the middle of winter, right? He says, Jesus actually was the thing we were looking for. Jesus is where hope and life was. Jesus represented the whole thing. And he says, Jesus looks like a king. Everyone would say, Matthew, king.
Matthew, king.
Good. Matthew wrote about Jesus as a king. And so everything in the narrative with Matthew is going to revolve around connecting him to different elements of king. So then there's Luke. Luke will look back, and Luke is not interested in king. He wants to associate Jesus with the other prophets that have come. So what you'll find with Luke is he's going to show connections to many different prophets, showing that he had a message of hope and challenge and it's actually perfect for the time period we're in. Maybe we missed it back then. Do you guys get it? The two, again, don't agree. Here's something interesting. When you look at Matthew's story, they leave Bethlehem because Herod is killing all the baby boys. Now, Bethlehem would have been a town with about 60 to 80 people. Not a big town. Killing all the newborns would not have been difficult. Am I right? However, they leave Bethlehem because Herod is killing all the babies. They go to Egypt for safety. And on the way back, after the birth, on the way back, they're going to end up in Nazareth. Everyone get that? Birth happens in Bethlehem. They run to Egypt for safety. They head back. They stay in Nazareth. Can any of you think of a story where an individual left the safety of home to go to Egypt to find life? You'll find many. What about the story of Joseph? Right? Interesting. Luke says, no. Here's how it went down. There was a census. The king took a census, which was a big no-no. And if you remember, David took a census once and he got punished. And so in Luke, the king takes a census. They end up leaving, going to Nazareth, and then on the way back to Bethlehem, what happens there is Jesus is born in the middle of nowhere on the road. It's a boy. Oh no, a census. Did you guys see the difference? Many people will point this out. Again, I will say there's a reason why they're telling the two the way they are. Matthew will talk about 3 wise men. He'll talk about a star. Luke, there are no wise men. There is no star. And there's some stinky shepherds that showed up. Right? The two look a little different. What do you do with that? Here's what's happening. The writers, they have Jesus in mind, and they are looking back. And so there's a lot of different characters that are going to show up in the story. You're going to see the Queen of Sheba. Anyone ever read the birth narrative and think, there's Queen Sheba? The Jews did. The people reading it did. For us, it's... Anyone ever read the birth narrative and think, oh yeah, there's Moses, baby Moses. Oh, there's David, there's Joseph. Because for a Jewish person, they would have immediately connected, oh, there's Samuel, there's David. They would have connected these things. For us today, we don't make the connections, partly because Christmas is more about how do I get that plasma 65-inch in my Prius, right? But here's some interesting things. When they're writing, when Matthew writes, he points out Herod, who was a king at that time, Jewish leader. He has a temple built just like David. He has a tower built. It's called the Tower of David. Who does Herod want you to believe he is? The next king. He's the next king. And so what the writers do is really political. It's like saying, I know that Trump is president, but we're going to choose Oprah right now. Like, what? First off, I just said Oprah and some of your heads exploded because that's actually a conversation being talked about right now. Either way, what's interesting about this is there's another story about infants being murdered during the time of someone else's reign. And these murders are extremely sad because, again, my daughter brings up a great question. She says, why would God let all the other infants die? Why only save one? That doesn't seem very nice, right? Like, what a monstrous God. And I have to say to my daughter, well, I think there's something deeper going on here. I think there's something deeper going on in the story. And so what happens is there is a miraculous moment where this birth comes out of tragedy. You guys see it? Our temple's been destroyed. There's going to be a new birth out of this tragedy. You just went through a divorce. There's going to be a new birth out of this tragedy. You lost the job. There's going to be a new birth out of this tragedy. The thing was experienced. The message is there's going to be a new birth after this tragedy. Just hold on. And so he looks back. And so, of course, Moses is going to show up in the story. Also, notice this, Isaiah 60, many people feel that when Matthew's writing, he's reading Isaiah 60, and I'll share with you why. First off, nations will come to your light, kings to the brightness of your rising. Again, the writers are looking back. They're looking at the Old Testament. They're writing. So what do you notice there? They'll come to the light, the brightness of your rising. For many people, they immediately say, yeah, a star. And which star? Well, if you're connecting that to David, it would be the star of David. Anyone finding this interesting so far? I know I am. I love this stuff. This is so fascinating. Again, you thought you were going to come here to hear a nice little story about Christmas. Isaiah 60, verse 4 says this, they all gather together. They'll come to you. Your sons will come from afar. Your daughters will be carried in the arms. Do you guys hear some connections here? So far you're thinking, yeah, but it could be many different things, right? Watch this now. Where'd the camels come from? Here you go. The wealth of the nations will come to you. The multitude of what? Camels. That's where you get your camels. Isn't that funny? Camels will cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba, again, a direct reference back to David when Sheba visits David. They will bring what? Gold and frankincense. And with it, good news of the praises of the Lord. The word there is, in the New Testament, would have been euangelion translated. Good news, a new rule, a new leadership. And of course, where's the myrrh? If you understand the connection with Sheba, Queen Sheba visits David. And when she visits him, guess what she brings him? Myrrh. Spices, yeah, interesting. So again, do you see the connections that they're making with the Jewish people? They want you to understand something interesting. They're taking from the past. They're showing you interesting connections to Jesus. Let me share with you more. The Wisemen. Ever wonder, why Wisemen? Why did this show up? That's just weird. Brooklyn was born just this month, or past month. There weren't any wise men that showed up. A couple of you showed up, but you're not wise men. I love you. Oh, what's the story there? Why wise men? Well, here's something interesting. The wise men show up, and they essentially do what they would do for any king. They do something called an anointing. And the anointing is to say, this individual is king. This individual will lead our people. And so what happens is Jesus, the story goes, is anointed at the same time that Herod is already ruling. Are you happy if you're Herod? No, you're not. What happened here is interesting because in Samuel, a wise man from afar, travels to David. And what does he do?
He anoints him while Saul is king.
Yeah, is Saul happy? It's like, hey, I'm still king. Are you serious? You can't do that. I'm still king. But there's something deeper going on. Our God has chosen a different path for Israel, and it's going to be through the unlikely one. Okay, let me keep showing you more. When you look at the two different stories, when you look at Christmas and you look at the nativity scene, what you're going to notice is they pull a lot from different stories, different narratives, different perspectives, and different people will show up. And so again, for Israel, it's so beautiful to me that all of these characters will show up. Because if you're a Jewish person and you're looking back, you are looking back at your history. You're looking back at who you were as a people. And now they're asking the question, where's life? Where's our new freedom? What does it look like? And the authors, this is what they're saying. Oh, it was actually right back there, not that long ago. Do you remember Jesus? Because some of us missed it. Because this is what real life looks like. If we follow in the teachings and the wisdom of Jesus, if we live that way, if we usher in the new kingdom reality Jesus spoke of, guess what? A whole new birth reality happens for our people, even in the middle of tragedy. You guys dig it? Let me say this. Keith and I were talking this week. When you experience something really painful, what is the temptation? When you experience something painful, let's say this, something painful happens, what do you do months later? What are you attempting to do months later? What was that? Give up, okay. Give up, avoid, blame, forget, right? We want to forget. We want to put that behind us. We'll oftentimes use that language. I'm going to put that behind me so I don't ever have to think about it again. We will purposely avoid certain things and will never confront the thing because it's so much easier to pretend the thing didn't happen and just avoid it, put it off, forget. And I think we live in a culture where it's really easy to forget. And I think a lot of our books and a lot of our entertainment all says, forget, just forget. But here's why Israel as a nation stuck around. Israel as a nation said, we don't forget. We remember. And by remembering, we share the stories. We share the perspectives. We share the victories, the losses. We share the defeats. We share the brokenness. We don't run from it. We share it. And when we share it, it actually empowers us to walk in something new. Because only when I remember can I really learn. Only when I remember can I fully walk in something new. And so for Israel, when Matthew and Luke tell the birth story, yes, it's something new, but it's also something very old. When they tell the birth story, they're remembering. When they tell the birth story, it's something far richer and deeper, and it's something you and I learn to do. And so here's many people will ask me, why does Matthew start out with a really boring name-dropping genealogy? You ever wonder? If you've ever read the book of Matthew, it's like, so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so, and you get this list of a bunch of old dead people. And you think, like, who would ever want to read that book? Am I right? Like, why would that book be remotely interesting to me? Well, for Israel, if you look over that name, that list of people, there's some really good people and there's really some big embarrassments in there. Think of your own family tree for a moment. Who are the relatives you choose to not talk about? Do you have some? Because I do. There are some people, and who knows, like my family may be like, it's Tony. I hope not. But there are certain individuals that maybe like, there was some conflict here. With the Wuerfel family, my grandma had a big farm, and then she gave it to two sons. It almost sounds like a Bible story, right? The two sons fought over it, and they ended up just selling it, and the land was lost. And now the one brother is looked really down on, and the other one is kind of, everyone's decided to love on him, but the other's been pushed away. We have these dark stories. Then we also have really good stories. My Uncle Neil, he was the fastest runner in Eaton Rapids. He was the first one in Eaton Rapids to do the mile in under 5 minutes. The first one. And during that time, that was like a huge deal. My Uncle Neil, he was like a rock star. And all of us wanted to be like Neil. My Grandma Rogers, in her 90s, ran again for the state representative. The county rep. And she won. Yeah, they love her. When people talk about my grandma and our family, it's going to be pretty cool. And so in all of us, we have these people that we bring up. Some people we avoid, some things that are dark, some things that are light. But again, for Israel, the birth story really starts there with a reminder. We are looking back and we're remembering. We're looking back and we're not shying away from those stories. We're remembering. And there's something really beautiful that happens when we remember. And so here's what I want you to do to start with. For fun, just for fun right now, I want you to turn to someone next to you. And it was kind of fun this morning because a couple of us, we sat around and we talked about our scar stories. And I thought, how good is that? I have a couple scars, and people ask me all the time, what happened there? what happened there? We all have a scar story. When I was younger, I have this big scar right here, and it's actually harder to see because I'm becoming more gorilla-like in my age. But if you pull back the layers of gorilla hair, you can see like this scar, this long scar. And there's 2 scars right here on my neck. And when I was younger, my cousins and I, we were playing, and we ran inside, and you're never supposed to run in Grandma's house. So first off, like, probably karma. So on the way out, we're running down the hallway, and I hear my grandma say, "You kids, stop running!" I was like, "Whatever, Grandma, I'm miles away." And I'm running, and the door opens, and then it closes, the glass door, and I push, and my head and arms go right through the glass window. And I remember going up to my, and I remember thinking, I am in so much trouble. And then I did what any kid would do, which you're never supposed to do. I pull and rips all of that. And I look down, and I'm terrified, and there's blood everywhere. And the first thought is, Grandma is going to kill me. My parents rush to the scene. My cousin Aaron is just freaking out because there's so much blood. My uncle notices you can see some veins hanging out of where the cut is, which later we'll find out was one of them, the jugular. Pretty exciting. They wrap my neck with towels. And my uncle, I remember the stories, and I vaguely remember just someone picking me up, my Uncle Ed, picking me up, and already my parents are in the car, and instead of opening, he does a Dukes of Hazzard, and he puts me through the window, as if I'd seen enough windows that day. Luckily, this one was down. He puts me through the front door, front seat, because you can do that back then. And they drive me 100 miles an hour in my parents' Plymouth to Sparrow Hospital, where they wheel me down, and they're putting injections into my neck, and I'm screaming, and I'm angry at my cousin, who later will tell me he still feels bad and thought he was the one that did this. We had a beautiful moment at a Thai restaurant where we talked about it. We all have these interesting scar stories, don't we? So what I want you to do is, just for fun, for a couple minutes, I just want you to turn to the one person next to you and just tell them a scar story. It could be any kind of scar. Let's not show each other if they're in just weird places. We don't want to get that reputation. So just turn to someone next to you. Tell them a scar story for a moment. Go for it. All right, so here we go. It's interesting when you tell a scar story, you're talking about something that potentially is a bit tragic, a little bit, and yet it's interesting that when you look around, most people are smiling, right? Because what you do, whether you know it or not, is you take the thing and you find a way to find something beautiful even in the tragedy, right? There's something very human about that whole process. And I think what's also beautiful about what we're doing right here and what the Jewish people did with Matthew and Luke is that we're remembering that our stories, we are standing on the shoulders of other generations before us, other past systems before us. Some of you know that I came from a certain system, and it's very easy for me to get a little bitter sometimes. I get a little angry. But I also have to have reminders. David did this a couple weeks ago for me. Reminders that even though certain things maybe didn't work, or there was pain, or there were scars, it's also part of who I am, and it's part of the shoulders I'm standing on now. And so the scars help me become who I am, right? And now I stand on the shoulders of so many different people and so many different groups, so many different stories, and I've become the person that I am. Yeah. And you become stronger and stronger. So here's something I'd like you to do as well. You have some paper in front of you. And what I'd like you to do is write down, I want you to first think about one person in your life that just you thought, this person is like the picture of what it looks like to be human, to be good, to be beautiful, to be together, right? I want you to write 5 characteristics of that person. Think of one person in your life who has just meant a great deal to you, been like a role model to you. That person. Think about that person and then write 5 characteristics about that person. As the music plays, do this on your own. But we're just going to give you a couple minutes. Write down 5 characteristics about that person in your life. Because again, we are people who we are standing on the shoulders of others that came before us. So whoever that person is, write down those characteristics about that person. All right. We did this as a leadership team, and some of the leadership is already looking at me and smiling because I think they know what's coming next. Here's what I want you to do. You are now going to, Morena, you're going to start because I just love you and you're not afraid to do it. So what Morena is going to do, and we're going to follow suit, is you're going to stand up and you're going to read it loud to us. But instead of saying your mother, you're going to say the words I am, and you're going to put that in place and say those comments about yourself. So would you be willing to stand up and read that again? But I am. When Keith had us do this as a leadership team, I chose Dr. Huxtable. Because I grew up before all the crap went down with Bill Cosby. The fictional character of Dr. Huxtable. And I remember writing all of these flowery descriptions of you're fun, you're creative, you love people hard, all of these different things. And I thought, yeah, those are good. And then Keith said, now say that of yourself. And I just, and it hit me. We are the people that we look up to. We are oftentimes our past helps us become who we are, and we stand on the shoulders of those before us. And I think when we understand that, especially understanding that's where the birth narrative starts, we understand it as a group of people, we can actually feel good about the fact that certain systems, certain people, certain things, those are the people who helped us get to where we are now. Standing on top of Daddy's shoulders, looking out on the world with a new life, a new experience, a new birth. And now we have all of this newness to texture the world with. What will you do with it? I would argue we start by being thankful and appreciative of where we came from, the scars and the celebrations, the beauty and the pain. And we continue moving in a direction that's going to build the temple here. Yeah? Let me finish by reading this quote, which really doesn't connect that well, but I just love it so much. This is my blessing to you before Brett gets up and sings again. Whenever I get gloomy with the state of the world, I think about the arrivals gate at Heathrow Airport. General opinions starting to make out that we live in a world of hatred and greed, but I don't see that. Seems to me that love is everywhere. Often it's not particularly dignified or newsworthy, but it's always there. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends, old friends, Dr. Huxtable. When the planes hit the Twin Towers, as far as I know, none of the phone calls from the people on board were messages of hate or revenge. They were all messages of love. If you look for it, I've got a sneaky feeling you'll find that love is actually all around us. Love y'all.
Love you.